on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope, in for Nigel Farage, who is still a bit poorly. But we do, however, have a special message from the Prime Minister later on, just for Nigel. Tune in and stay tuned for that. Overnight we heard there's been a second round of airstrikes on the Houthis in Yemen. Are we on the brink of a war? We'll discuss that with a top senior Tory. And the blob is back to its meddling ways, this time advising the Treasury that we need more immigration. Yep, you heard that right, and probably Nigel did too from his sickbed. More immigration. And are Labour the right party for the NHS? They've promised to get tough on waste. We'll have all that in the next hour, but first the news with Polly.
Yes, it is me, Christopher. Good evening. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is, as Chris was saying, the Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen, following a spate of attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described the attacks by the Iranian-backed militants today as illegal and unacceptable, and it comes after last night's joint strike with the US, which took place after a meeting with President Biden. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, backed the government's targeted action, and Rishi Sunak signalled new sanctions could be possible in the coming days, warning further attacks will be met with a response.
We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice.
Prime Minister. Now, forecasters are warning of strong winds and heavy rain across the whole of the UK tonight as another storm sweeps in. She's called Storm Joselyn. She's already battering Britain tonight. There are amber and yellow alerts for much of the country, particularly the north. And there are yellow warnings for rain and ice also in place for northern and eastern parts of Scotland. No trains running in Scotland from tonight, from about now, 7 o'clock, and tomorrow's rush hour. Trains will be out of service as well as ScotRail checks the lines for damage. Drivers are being advised to postpone journeys and not park near trees. News from the United States, and Donald Trump says he expects his last remaining Republican opponent to drop out after today's New Hampshire primary. Polls are pointing to a likely victory for the former president, but Nikki Haley has gained support and her exit isn't guaranteed. Anthony Scaramucci was Trump's director of comms during his time in the White House. He told GB News Trump lacks the temperament to be an effective leader.
There are 20 cabinet members that work for Mr. Trump closely and directly alongside of myself. Now, granted, I was there for 11 days, but I did work for him for close to a year on the campaign. And we all saw the same thing, and we were all speaking out against his temperament to be the president of the United States. So things do change, facts change, and smart people change their opinion when the facts change.
Anthony Scaramucci. Now, Royal Mail has been charging customers £5 to get their post after senders unknowingly bought fake stamps from some post offices. An investigation by us here at GB News found books of stamps bought directly from post offices and some supermarkets were found to be counterfeit. Those affected are now being forced to pay 4 times the cost of standard first-class stamps. The post office says it receives stamps directly from Royal Mail. A spokesperson for Royal Mail told GB News it does have a robust process for verifying stamps, and anyone who thinks they've been incorrectly charged should contact them. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope, standing in for Nigel Farage on GB News this evening. Now, last night, the UK and US military launched fresh strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen as they continue to attack vessels in the Red Sea. 4 RAF Typhoons and a pair of Voyager tankers were involved in the latest strikes. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, insisted the UK will not hesitate to strike again, but didn't want to state whether the UK was in a prolonged fight with the Houthis. Questions are now being asked about whether we have the military strength to be involved in such action, given the falling numbers on troops, and also whether it's time for Parliament to be given a vote on the strikes themselves in Yemen. The question I'm asking tonight is this: should the UK have got involved in strikes against the Houthi rebels? Please let me know your thoughts. Email me, farage@gbnews.com. Let's go to Mark Francois. Mark, you are a senior figure on the Defence Select Committee. Do you worry about why we're involved in the Yemen?
I think what we've done is right. I think the Prime Minister, when he told the Commons today this was ultimately an act of self-defence, was correct. Under international law, there is no question at all that we and the Americans can take action to maintain freedom of navigation on the seas. The Houthis are using rockets to try and attack warships going about innocent passage. And if we don't do this, if we let them carry on doing it, then the Red Sea will be out, everything will have to go via the Cape, and what that means for your viewers is that about a month or so from now, the price of their petrol is going to start to skyrocket. So what we have done is proportionate, it is correct under international law, and I absolutely back the Prime Minister in doing this.
Why is it just the UK and US doing the actual attacks?
Well, firstly, because we have the capability to do it. Secondly, perhaps because some of our European partners are more skittish. But look, historically, we are a maritime nation. 90% of our trade comes by sea. The Royal Navy, historically, one of its missions down the centuries has been to provide freedom of navigation for our ships and those of our allies, and that is what our armed forces are doing. So, at the end of the day, Iran's behind it. Not a secret, they're also behind Hamas, they're also behind Hezbollah. So we know ultimately where this is being engineered from. And we very much hope that the Houthis will desist. But if they won't, these strikes may have to continue until they do.
And there's no vote in the House of Commons. There's a general debate tomorrow in the House of Commons on this, when the Commons will note what's happening, but it's not amendable. So there's no vote, unlike in 2013 when there was a vote on bombing in Syria, which the government lost.
I think the circumstances are different. I think I remember the Syria vote was controversial. I was in that debate. I sat through virtually every minute of it. Actually, it was a debate about Iraq. Even though theoretically we were voting about Syria, I was there.
Iraq 2003, you mean?
Yes.
So there's nervousness about Iraq 2003.
Yes, but these are targeted, proportionate strikes designed for one single purpose. In the Syria debate, the argument was, what are the strikes for? I remember all of this. In this case, it couldn't be clearer. It's to stop the Houthis firing rockets at innocent merchant shipping. It's a very crystal clear military objective, and that's why I think the Commons should be behind the Prime Minister, and I don't think we need a vote to prove it.
At all, even if there's several more one-off strikes, because last week's Friday strike was one-off, so was last night's. I mean, at what point do you say, well, hang on, let's ensure that the whole Commons is behind this?
Well, I hope the Houthis will stop. Chopper, let's see how this plays out, but I don't think we want to be in a situation where we have to have a vote in the House of Commons, despite what Sir Ed Davey likes to say, if we drop one bomb anywhere in the world, because if we do that, we're playing right into the hands of our potential enemies. We'd be totally hamstrung.
And we've got this declining numbers of personnel, 30,000 or so in the Royal Navy, 2,700 reservists. Is that enough? Do you feel confident that's enough?
Right. Related issue. On recruitment and retention, we do have a crisis, and I use the word advisedly, Chopper. At the moment, the bottom line figure is, for every one new recruit that joins the armed forces, whichever service, 3 are leaving. So it's a graphic example that my wife works in the NHS, so I'm now using medical analogies. In terms of retention of armed forces personnel, it's a bit like a patient on the operating theatre bleeding out. If you can't stop the bleeding, eventually you lose the patient. So we need the Defence Secretary needs to come to Parliament, make a statement on what we're going to do to stop people leaving the armed forces, because if we don't, in a few years from now, we won't be able to carry out those sorts of actions against the Houthis, because we won't have the people to maintain the jets to take off.
Well, I've got you, Mark Francois. I must ask you about the votes last week. Do you feel betrayed by colleagues? The 60 or so who supported the amendments to harden up that Rwanda bill diminished to just 11 of you by the third reading. They let you down, didn't they?
No, Chopper. At the end of the day, and in a situation like this, everybody has to look into their own heart and decide what to do. My view is this. We made our point. We're on the record, as you would say. Either a plane takes off or it doesn't. We thought it might not. Others thought it would. It's going to take a few months to find out either way, isn't it? Because we've got to get the bill through the Lords, and then there may be a ping-pong and objections. At some point, a few months from now, either a plane will take off or it won't. If the plane takes off, I will come in the studio
and eat your hat.
Well, I won't eat anything, but I will put my hand up and say I was wrong. But let's just see what happens.
Did you feel betrayed? How did you feel when you were alone there with 10 other colleagues?
Well, we weren't alone. There was, you had Ocean's 11. Maybe we were Kruger's 11. I wasn't entirely alone, Chopper.
Mark Francois, thank you. Now, meanwhile, Israel troops have suffered their deadliest day of fighting after 24 soldiers were killed by Hamas, both in central Gaza and as ground forces approached the enclave's second city, Khan Yunis. It comes as Israel continues to face calls for a permanent ceasefire as the amount of Palestinian people facing starvation and dying continues to rise. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is still refusing to accept any deals, saying that Hamas was demanding too high a price for any truce and vowed that Israel will not stop fighting until total victory. Joining me now to discuss this is E.L. Byram, a currently reserve captain in Israeli Defence Special Forces. E.L., thank you for joining us today. It's been so difficult for you. You've been out fighting in Gaza.
Yeah, I just returned from my service, and what I can tell you is that the IDF, although they're fighting in one of the most complicated wars in the last years, are doing a fantastic work. There are tragedies, like the tragedy of today, but I can guarantee that as the IDF is learning and debriefing in any situation, like the 24 soldiers who've been killed in the last day, they just do it because we understand that we don't have any other option. Although we need this war, making sure that Hamas will not be in power, and the remaining hostages still held by Hamas will return home.
What does victory look like for you? Is it surely, you have to allow some kind of two-state solution? Is what the way the West sees it, and that's disputed by Benjamin Netanyahu.
I'm not the Prime Minister spokesperson. What I can say from the Israeli society essence is that we are not interested about terminology, but we look for the essence, for the topics, what is real on the ground. And what we see as Israeli side, that we don't want nor to control the Palestinians, but on the other hand, to make sure that in the future, October 7 cannot happen again. Not in Gaza, not in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, and not in the north with Lebanon. And what we see right now is many people chanting from the river to the sea. And what we understand is that although Israel tried in 1967, 1948, 2000, 2008 and more to try to have a two-state solution, it was always rejected. And we understand right now that the Palestinian side are aiming not just to have a small Jewish state, but they don't want to have any Jewish state. And this is, of course, the threat and what is the danger that we see.
And you have friends who have died. Is that right? You know people who have died. And do you know any of the hostages? Or
Unfortunately, I lost nine of my friends during this war, and I think every Israeli have many friends and family members, people that know that been killed. And on October 7, before the war was started, Israel was not aiming to start a war, and more than that, wanted to continue the ceasefire that was there and before that, as people dance in the Nova Festival. And what we are aiming right now to make sure that stopping right now the war and chanting for a ceasefire now will make sure that Hamas will stay in power, but more than that, it will just create in a shorter future we will see another October 7th happening. And we do not want to see it, as I mentioned, not in the Gaza border and not in any other border.
So what does peace look like then? I mean, you'll have to withdraw back to the border pre-October the 7th. Israel will withdraw, and then what? Who will help rebuild Gaza?
I think Israel is looking for one thing, and when it will be guaranteed, we will see a different future, which is security. Right now, the security of Israel and the future of Israel is not in the future that we can see. On 2006, after the war with Lebanon, the IDF withdrew from Lebanon, and there is a resolution by the Security Council that Hamas and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon continue to dispute it and putting their forces on the border. And we want to make sure that all the guarantees that will be put to Israel would be guarantees that will be also enforced. And this is a problem in Gaza, this is a problem in Lebanon, this is a problem in the West Bank.
And you look at the demonstrations in the streets of London. What's your message to those people demonstrating the pro-Palestine marches?
What I can say as an IDF officer, being there on the ground, is that the IDF is taking the life of the Palestinians more seriously than Hamas. Because Hamas is putting their weapons in hospitals, in UN facilities and in school, when the IDF is preventing on a daily basis any non-combatant casualties. Although it's happening because Hamas is forcing them to live. But this is the reality that we face. In every brief before a mission that we go out, we're speaking about the civilians on the other side. And although most of Hamas terrorists do not go with uniform, they try to go as citizen and then to attack and return back for their civilian areas.
So, could I make one point?
Yeah, Mark.
I apologise for interrupting. Everyone knows Iran's behind it. It's not a secret. They're behind Hamas, they're behind Hezbollah, they're behind the Houthis. Our government has just banned Hizb ut-Tahrir. We've made them a proscribed organisation. When are we going to take the next logical step and prescribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in the United Kingdom?
I agree with you, and I think this is all Iran threats that's starting to continue from the Houthis to Lebanon, Hezbollah to Hamas to the Iraqi forces to the Syrian forces and more. And this is the common threat that we are facing as the Western world. The UK is fighting in Yemen right now, while Israel is fighting in Gaza and in Lebanon, and we need to understand that we should win it together.
Well, you should abide by the law of armed conflict. I think you should. But Iran does not have that constraint. So let us be realistic about this. When will the British government take the next logical step? If we are bombing the Houthis, it makes no sense at all not to ban and prescribe the IRGC, does it?
I agree with you, with everything you said. I think Iran is the threat for the region and globally.
And just finally, how does it end? What is the ending? Is the last hostage is released and then it stops?
Yeah, the end, as Anthony Blinken said, the end will be, and no Gazan will be die when all the hostages will be back and Hamas will surrender. And until it will not happen, we will continue seeing the war happening. And I hope then people are walking in the street and call for ceasefire. They should call for Hamas to surrender and send back all the hostages. And I hope it will happen soon. But we are more likely to see a few years of a war.
A few years.
It may happen. Yeah, that's what Israel is preparing right now.
OK, well, thank you. Eyal Barim, thank you for joining us today. The former IDF officer and Conservative MP, of course, Marc Francois. Now, yes, over to a break now. In a minute, we'll be talking about Treasury orthodoxy and why the Treasury is advising number 10 to increase migration to boost growth. We'll be asking this question: is the Treasury too powerful? And are tax cuts the answer the Tories are looking for? This is Christopher Hope in for Nigel Farage on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Farage on GB News, and I'm Christopher Hope in for Nigel. Now, before the break, I asked you, should we have got involved in strikes against Houthi rebels? You've been getting in touch. Alison says, yes, we need to stop the Houthis! Exclamation mark. Peter says, whose ships are being attacked and who is responding to those attacks? Rishi Sunak said self-defence. Pat says, of course we should defend Red Sea shipping, and we should also hit back Israel. We should back Israel to the hilt against these and other barbarous terrorists. And Gary says, I'm fully in agreement with the strike and fully back the continued strikes if necessary. It's about time we stood up strong against those terrorists. Now, leaked documents seen by Bloomberg reveal that the Treasury advised then-Chancellor Rishi Sunak in 2022 that cutting taxes would have a low impact on boosting growth, with Treasury staff reportedly claiming a hike to high-skilled immigration and changing planning rules to build more homes will be better for the economy at lower fiscal cost. Now, Rishi Sunak and the Treasury declined to comment, but an official close to Jeremy Hunt, the current Chancellor, pointed to analysis by the UK's fiscal watchdog, which found that measures announced in the autumn would see a permanent 0.5% increase in output by 2028. Well, are they right, or is this just more anti-growth Treasury orthodoxy? Joining me tonight to discuss just this is Elliot Keck, the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, and Eamon Ives, the head of research at the Entrepreneurs Network and a former government advisor to Alok Sharma. Thank you, Elliot, of the Taxpayers Alliance. First to you, do you worry about the impact of net migration?
I think, listen, the Treasury is right to point to the fact that there is more to growth than simply tax cuts. And, coming from the Taxpayers Alliance, that should hopefully carry a little bit of weight. Planning is an important part of it. Having the right level of particularly high-skilled immigration to ensure that where there are vacancies is important. But I think they are completely wrong to dismiss tax cuts and that the way they have done. I think this is a typical Treasury orthodoxy where they're looking at the books, they're looking at essentially the static impact of a tax cut, where they're just thinking, OK, in year one, we're going to have a little less revenue. That's going to be a problem for us. And they're not thinking about the longer term. How does that impact people's behaviour? And what the Taxpayers Alliance has found through our dynamic modelling, which assesses people's behaviour in response to tax cuts, finds that actually often you recoup as much as half and sometimes even the whole amount of the tax cut over an extended period of time.
Eamon, what's your take on net migration? It's seen as why is the government allowing people to be on benefits, not driving more of them back into the workplace?
Well, I think it's important to note that immigration is an essential part of a thriving and flourishing economy. We know that immigrants disproportionately found some of our most high growth and innovative companies. I think they're going to be essential for the UK going forwards. So I think this Treasury analysis that we've seen here is actually quite right on the presenting that sort of case to the Chancellor that if we do want to see economic growth, I think we need to be open and honest about that. That immigrants are going to be an essential part of that.
But at what levels are you happy? Elliot Keck, 745,000 in 1 year is too many.
Well, I think, again, it depends on what importance you place on economic growth above everything else. And I think that is a genuine conversation that politicians need to have. So, for example, the level of tax that the Taxpayers Alliance advocates, which is about 33% of national income.
And where are we now again?
We're about 36, 37 heading towards. That's significantly above the academic consensus of the growth optimising rate, which is more like 20, 21%. And that's because we recognise that actually public services are worth funding. So the question on immigration is, OK, it's possible that immigration may boost the UK economy, but if that comes to the harm of many other things, whether it's people's sense of belonging in the nation, whether it's some parts of the United Kingdom that don't get access to the training and the skills, then you do have a bit of a trade-off there, and that's something politicians do need to be honest about.
Where's that balance lie for you, Eamon? I mean, you need to have some migration. Maybe the higher skilled type of migrant coming here is good, but the lower skilled is not so good.
I mean, I think it's an open question. I mean, I personally am quite relaxed with, reasonably high levels of immigration. I think I look at some of the most important and lucrative countries in the country, and I think they, very often founded or co-founded by somebody who's born overseas, someone who wants to bring their talents here. They see the UK as a very attractive place to set up a business, and I don't see why we would want to necessarily turn or shut the door on those sorts of people.
But you're relaxed because you're not affected by it. So the point about net migration is that it can put a lot of stress on school places, GP surgeries, dental appointments. Is that right? Or have you been badly affected by net migration?
I do go to the dentist. I do use the NHS, and
that's where you are. You're not affected by it, but certainly some communities they feel they can't get access to services.
I mean, that might be something they feel. I'm not convinced. I think a lot of the evidence is there that immigrants contribute more fiscally than they take out. And if we do want to create a visa system as organisations like the one I work for have campaigned for, We want to make it easier for people who can contribute those higher salaries to come into this country much more easily.
Is a number oversimplistic? Tens of thousands was a figure which David Cameron said, didn't he, in 2010? Never got near that, and now we're 7 times that figure last year.
I think definitely when you get into the realm of talking about tens of thousands, if you're not hitting that over an extended period of time, you do have a problem with your losing trust among the public. And I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are to some extent seeing that on the tax front as well, where, you know, they're complaining about the fact that they haven't seen the benefits of the national insurance cut. Well, inevitably, the tax burden is still heading to a record high. People are not feeling wealthier. So I think it's important that when politicians make promises, there is a feasible way that they can achieve it. And maybe that's not achieve it to 100%, maybe that's not achieve everything that they say, but when there's such a disparity between the rhetoric and the reality, that's when you get into real problems in politics.
Yeah, with that migration, Labour comes in, they won't put numbers on it either, will they? So we are going to be... I mean, it's almost a kind of credit to this country that we are wanting people to come here, don't we? I mean, in a sense, that's a good thing.
I think it's fantastic that people want to come here, and I don't see why that should be something that we shy away from. You know, as I said, if we want to be capturing ththose kind of new industries of the future, AI, biosciences, things like that, then I think we need to look at where those talents lie and make the UK an attractive environment to enable people to come and deploy those talents.
Well, Eamon Ives, Head of Research at the Entrepreneurs Network and a former Special Advisor, thank you. And to you, Elliot Keck, too, Head of Campaigns at Taxpayers Alliance, thank you. I'm joined now by my colleague, Patrick Christis, who has a brilliant exclusive on his show this evening from 9 p.m. Patrick, you visited the Michaela Community School today, the free school at the centre of a Muslim prayer row, for an in-depth chat with Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh. Ms Birbalsingh revealed why her school's strict ethos meant she couldn't open a prayer room in her school, and the toll the case has taken on her and her staff. Tell us more.
Yeah, look, put simply, this is the interview of the day. If you had plans between 9 and 11 p.m. tonight, cancel those plans, sit in front of your television, put GB News on and watch my show, because this court case cuts right to the very heart of major issues in Britain at the moment. Britain's strictest head teacher, a school with impeccable results, a school founded on community and multiculturalism working well together, has now been dragged to the High Court by one singular radical Muslim pupil, funded by taxpayer-funded legal aid, over whether or not she should introduce a Muslim prayer room in that school. She's received death threats, the school's received bomb threats, teachers have been targeted at home. Look, I caught up with her earlier today. This court case does, like I was saying, cut right to the very heart of massive problems in Britain at the moment about radical fundamentalism infiltrating British society. Here's a little snippet of what Catherine Birbalsingh had to say to me.
We all need to recognise that all of us need to make sacrifices for the betterment of the whole so that we can all get on, and that schools play such an important part of this. Now, obviously, if your school is one where the children roam the corridors and the children do whatever they like during lunch, then I suppose you might choose to have a prayer room, and that's fine. You know, I'm not suggesting that all schools shouldn't have a prayer room, but I do think that if a school's ethos is such and building is such that they cannot have a prayer room, then they should be allowed to not have a prayer room.
Well, Patrick, that'll be a must-watch interview tonight, and we'll be tuning in at 9 p.m. Thank you. Now, coming up, the Labour Party has criticised the amount wasted within the NHS, warning it could bankrupt the health service. This is Farage on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Farage on GB News with me, Christopher Hope, in for Nigel. And Nigel, get well soon. The Labour Party today waged war on waste within the NHS. They've warned that not making the most of public money could bankrupt the health service. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told the Sun newspaper he has identified £10 billion worth of waste and called for reform of the health service, telling the newspaper you can't just keep on pouring ever-increasing amounts of money into a leaky bucket. You've got to deal with the bucket itself. And recent polling on which the party would be best placed to handle the NHS had Labour at 39% and the Tories at just 11%. So who's best placed to deal with our health service? Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Peter Carter, independent health consultant and a former chief executive of the Royal College of Nursing. Peter, have you experienced waste within NHS in your time?
Yes, I'm saddened to say, and I do want to say, Christopher, that I still think, despite the difficulties, we have a very good health service, but it could be better. And over the years, from successive governments, we have seen waste and things being done which have put a lot of financial pressure on the NHS. And if I can go on to say that my worry is in this election year, we're going to get promises and commitments from political parties across the spectrum promising that they're going to sort things out. And one of the things they will be saying is they're going to eliminate waste. Now, who could possibly disagree with that? What I would say to the Labour Party is two things. First of all, can you please produce us some costed plans, identify where is the waste, how much, and how you're going to go about it. And the second thing, if I could go on to say, is this. I hope the Labour Party have learnt the lessons from the last time that they were in power. Because at that time, there was a lot of money in the economy, and the Labour Party did do some very good things with the NHS, but they also wasted a huge amount of money. And may I give you one example? In 2002, they set up an IT system, and that was going to cost £2.3 billion, a lot of public money. By 2008, that had overspent to £12 billion. I mean, it's an astronomical overspend, and the whole thing collapsed, and we didn't have an IT system. Now, so I say to the Labour Party, be very cautious about making a whole range of sweeping promises, because when you get into power, it might be more difficult to deliver, and that's not in anyone's interests.
Do we need to differentiate between acute care, where the NHS can be so good, and longer-term issues when you have these huge waiting lists building up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not through the fault of clinical staff. You couldn't wish for a more dedicated group of public servants, and they're working extremely hard. But what you need to do is look at why have we got some of these problems? And there's a whole range of things, and we won't have time to cover them, I know, in this interview, but I could just make a couple of points. Endless governments of all persuasions have not addressed the issue of social care. And Christopher, as you and I are sitting here tonight interviewing me, there are 13,000 people in our hospitals that do not need to be there, but they can't be discharged either because of a lack of investment in social care or because of the disastrous cuts in district nurses. Sorry?
I was going to say, of course, that's the issue of social care, which is all part of the same conversation. What's the worst piece of waste you've experienced in the NHS? You thought if only ministers could see this, they could sort it out?
Well, perpetual reorganisations. And again, every government that comes into power, and I've been around a long time now, they are just they cannot resist reorganising the NHS. And West Streeting has talked about this. They're going to restructure. And I guarantee you it will cost billions of pounds. It will take years. They'll take their eye off the ball, and it will not achieve any meaningful purpose. So what I would say to the Labour Party or the Conservatives or the Lib Dems or anyone else, talk to the clinicians, talk to the managers that are currently in the NHS and work together to find some sensible solutions rather than making a whole raft of promises which they will struggle to deliver.
Well, Dr. Peter Carter, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage on GB News. We'll be next is Chris Thomas, Head of Commission on Health and Prosperity at the Institute for Public Policy Research. Chris, looking at that polling earlier, is it the case then that really Labour and not the Tories have the political space to do actual reform to the NHS because the Tories aren't trusted on the NHS?
Look, I think the real issue here is that there is no political party that, if they decide to take a very command and control, an individual will solve this kind of approach, will be able to put the NHS back on track. I think any politician coming in has to identify that a lot of this waste is local. It's about local variation between hospital and hospital. And the only real solution is really to give power back to clinicians. It's to devolve power and to let clinicians get on with the job of identifying what's going wrong and putting in place the solutions. They're often best placed to see where things are wrong and to identify how to change it.
And it's hard to target that money. I mean, we think back then to 2001, 2002, when Labour spent heavily on the NHS, and critics said a lot of it went into the pockets of staff rather than improving the outcomes for patients.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the recent history of the NHS is that money hasn't been going into clinicians' pockets, and in fact we've seen big real-term pay cuts and a real staffing crisis in the NHS, and that's inefficient in its own right. It's very hard to run an efficient system when demand is really, really acute and the system is running absolutely at the hottest it can be. In fact, that can create a great deal of waste because people are firefighting constantly. And what we also hear when we talk to staff themselves is that it's very hard for them to access in the system at the moment small pots of money that could just lubricate their attempts to do things slightly better, slightly differently. And I think that's a challenge. Look, I think in lots of cases, this is about making sure there's, if we really want to get tough on waste, it's about making sure there are small pots of money that we can spend today, spend smartly, that can deliver returns in the long term. And that's what we've really failed to do over the last 15 years.
And learning best practice between different hospitals, of course, that kind of thing. Is it time, do you think, for a royal commission on the NHS, cross-party, take the politics out of the whole area altogether?
No, I mean, ultimately, I think health is a political issue. Healthcare is a political issue. And I think royal commissions, you know, they're very good at kind of broad brush, big reform ideas, reorganisations, but I'm not sure that's entirely what the NHS needs at the moment. I think what it genuinely needs is two things. It needs, one, someone to come and give power to those that know what to do, what their kind of best practice looks like. And so we have one of the most centralised NHS in the world. Devolving some of that power seems an infinitely sensible idea. But also for us to get a grip on the demand issue. So one of the big challenges the NHS is facing is that we have done so little on prevention in the last 10 years. That means that it's facing this rising tide of demand that's really, really difficult. And so if a politician really wanted to get a grip on healthcare, well, they need to look at the health of the country, and that means getting kind of big ideas out on obesity, on alcohol, on smoking. We've seen some of that, of course, on mouldy housing and all these other things.
These are new ideas, but the idea of a leaky bucket, is that a bit unfair of West Streeting, or do you get what he's talking about?
No, I think the current situation, the evidence of our eyes, is that lots of people will see we are paying more and more each year for an NHS that delivers less and less quality, and our estimates are that that will continue over the next 10 years without intervention. And I don't think that's a good situation. It's not good for the NHS, where staff are working under pressure. It's not good for patients. It's not good for public finances. So I do think we need to get a handle on that, but that's about getting prevention right. That's about long-term productivity, really.
OK. Well, Chris Thomas from the IPPR, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage on GB News. Now, Nigel may be away, but that hasn't stopped the Prime Minister. Yes, the Prime Minister sending him a personalised message.
Hi, Nigel. I just wanted to take a moment to wish you a very happy new year. Now, like you, I think immigration levels are too high. So I hope you know that today and every day throughout 2024, whether I'm working in my office in Downing Street or at home in Yorkshire, I will deliver for you.
Well, Nigel, if you were here today, we'd probably say about time. But I must clarify that this is actually one of the latest Tory campaign ads from the party, in which anyone can sign up for a message from Rishi Sunak by entering their own name for a personalised clip. Guido Fawkes, a political gossip website, did this for Nigel, and that was the result. Now, we tried Christopher, which worked, but when it comes to Boris, Liz and Keir, all we got was a hi there from the PM. Now, Tory party sources assure us these messages were not generated by artificial intelligence. Rishi Sunak really did record an entire database of names, but they won't tell us how many. Now, in a moment, is an outright ban on vapes the right way to tackle smoking? The WHO, the World Health Organization, thinks so and wants the UK to adopt their recommendations. We'll debate that next. This is Farage.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. I speak to Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh. What happened on the day of the bomb threat, then?
Well...
She opens up about being taken to court for banning Muslim prayer rooms.
But I do think that if a school's ethos is such and building is such that they cannot have a prayer room, then they should be allowed to not have a prayer room.
It's a landmark legal case that will have enormous ramifications on the future of Britain.
All of us need to make sacrifices for the betterment of the whole so that we can all get on.
Is multiculturalism failing? Find out on a special Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Hampshire Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Now, despite studies claiming that vaping is 95% less harmful than smoking, the World Health Organization wants the same bans and regulations on devices as normal cigarettes. Now, last week, a debate took place in Westminster, and one of those MPs who spoke out against the WHO's proposals was Adam Afriyie, the Tory MP for Windsor. Adam, welcome to Farage on GB News. What are you calling for?
Well, it's great to be here. I think what I'm calling for is, I don't know, for the World Health Organization, for the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, to actually be rational and reasonable. But above all, look, here in the UK, we are just leading the world, OK? Smoking rates were 82% back in the 1940s, down to 48%, 42% approximately in the 70s. Now we're down to like 12 or 13%. We are leading the whole world because of the principle of harm reduction. If you've got one product that's killing people, 60,000 a year, and you've got another product that hasn't killed anybody, you're better off encouraging people to switch.
Are they harmful vapes? I mean, it's basically I don't vape. It's steam, isn't it, that comes out your mouth when you...
Yeah, absolutely. But according to the World Health Organization, they're trying to redefine steam as smoke. This is how crazy the policies are. So they're very much anti-science, anti-capitalist. And what I'm hoping is that the COP10 is that actually the UK will take the lead and actually put forward the policies which have been successful, which have made Britain very successful in helping with smoking cessation.
Is it about tax? Because, of course, the Treasury makes money on cigarettes. It's a declining income source for the Treasury. Perhaps they want to tax vapes more.
Yeah, so I think we're probably at peak tax from cigarettes, and as smoking declines, then the tax goes down. But I think, look, the industry, everyone is open to an excise duty and to some form of tax on vaping at some point. Yeah. And I think that's right.
But you've spoken out, of course, in the House on vaping, but you're also paid by elements of the vaping industry. You've got stakes in a company. Your wife's got stakes in a company. Some would say that you're saying this because you're paid by the industry.
Yeah, I've never been paid by the industry.
OK, good.
Don't believe everything that you read.
Right, but your wife has a stake in the company that makes the vapes.
My wife is a private individual who does her own thing. But look, I've been vaping for about probably 16 years, probably one of the earliest vapers in the UK, and I've always spoken about vaping because it's saving lives. And it seems to me that if we pursue the agenda of the WHO, then we will be killing people across the globe. And I very much hope that they embrace the UK agenda, which is saving lives.
How are they justifying it? Is it about the throwing away of disposable vapes? Is that the problem?
No, I think what it is that they seem to believe that the big tobacco is somehow manipulating people to become addicted to vaping, when actually the evidence is pretty clear that what's happening is people are giving up smoking, which is killing them, and replacing it with vaping.
Because they like smoking. I mean, if Nigel Farage was sitting here, he'd have a more informed chat with you about smoking.
I was going to have a go at him and encourage him to try vaping instead. But no, so I think they're trying to say that they're equivalent and there should be no harm at all to anybody ever. But the interesting thing is at the moment is we say here that it's 95% safer than smoking, but actually there's no evidence at the moment at all that anyone has really ever been harmed from vaping. So I think you've got to look at the relative harm.
Are you comfortable with the fruit flavours? I mean, it's like in the old days with Alco Pops, didn't we? Aiming alcohol, some alcohol lemonade aimed at children. I mean, these are like sweets almost, aren't they?
Yeah, so I've spoken at many conferences on this and I've flown around the world just saying how well Britain is doing in this regard. So quite clearly, any company that targets children, whether it's with the flavours, the packaging or the marketing in any way, I mean, it's very, very bad behaviour. It has to stop, and I hope that in the regulatory changes coming up that we will do that. That, there is no excuse for marketing these things to children, full stop.
Good. While I've got you here, I asked Mark Francois about the Rwanda bill. I've got to ask you, because, of course, you backed those amendments, one of the 60, but then you bottled it at the final third reading, can I say that? And you didn't vote against the bill, even though you thought it wasn't strong enough. You abstained.
I don't think anyone has ever accused me of having any form of cowardice, having been a Spartan through the Brexit.
You're one of the 28 Spartans back in through the vote through, of course.
That's right, through the Brexit debates. No, but my view was that I was backing those amendments because they would have made the bill work, in my view. I'm worried that the bill as it stands is not going to work. It's going to embarrass the government if it actually gets through the Lords, and I think that would be a terrible place to be. So, but once the amendments had fallen, it's quite clear that wasn't the will of Parliament. Then I felt I couldn't wholeheartedly back the bill, but I wasn't going to stand in the way. It's better than nothing, but it's not good enough.
No, and can you look Mark Francois in the eye? He was the coach of one of the Spartans too with you in 2019, but he actually did go through the no lobby this time, didn't he?
Yeah, well, each MP has to make up their own mind. I think he was very, very much committed to those amendments and felt very strongly about them. I felt very strongly about them, but my judgment is that we're better to have a bill on the statute book that may work rather than no bill at all.
And will it work? Will you bet me a pint of beer?
Oh, Christopher,
I'm going to bet you a pint of beer.
Do you know? I don't know. And in many ways, look, if the House of Lords plays silly buggers and holds it up, then maybe we'll have to go to an election saying that we're going to bring it through.
Well, Anna Mafrega, thank you for joining us today on Farage on GB News. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you, but I'm here. Before I go, a reminder that from tomorrow midday, you can watch my new PMQ show on GB News with the glorious Gloria De Piero, where we'll give you the best reaction live to Sunak versus Starmer round 94 as they try to get one up on each other in the House of Commons. But up next, the man himself, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, what's on your show?
Well, I'm going to be talking about their lordships and what they're doing, whether they're acting constitutionally. And I've got Vernon Bogdan coming on, who is the absolute expert on the Constitution. I don't think there's anybody in the country who knows more about the Constitution than Vernon.
He's a knight, not a lord yet?
He is a knight, very distinguished knight too, but I'm looking forward to talking about him because they used the Constitutional Reform Act of 2010 for the first time yesterday to try and stop a treaty. And I think that's very interesting constitutionally, but it's also the overreach of the House of Lords. Is this peers against the people round 27?
They're doing their job, aren't they? You're a constitutional expert. They're revising the
well, that's the discussion. That's the discussion we're going to be having. So you're going to have to tune in and listen to find out whether they're behaving well or badly.
Well, there we have it. Jacob Rees-Mogg will be tuning into your show, and thank you for joining us and watching me, Christopher Hope, our put editor here for Nigel Farage. But first up, here comes the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Joselyn sweeps through overnight, increasingly windy with heavy showers for many of us, although the wettest weather carried through on Tuesday is now clearing to showers and some longer spells of rain in the far northwest. It is in the far northwest where the strongest of the winds will be. And for many parts of the UK, we'll see wind gusts of 50 miles an hour, 65 near coasts. But for the north and west of Scotland, that's where we've got an amber warning because overnight winds will gust up to 70 or 80 miles an hour. Yes, a bit more of a normal winter storm compared with Storm Isha, but the clear-up operation still continues with Isha, so Storm Joselyn could lead to considerable further impacts. As we start Wednesday, there'll be some bright weather around. It will still be blustery. There'll still be quite a number of showers across Scotland and Northern Ireland. However, even in between these showers, there'll be some brighter interludes, and further south we'll keep the sunshine going in many places until later in the day.
A mild day to come, although perhaps not feeling so pleasant with the gusty winds continuing. And into the start of Thursday, rain moves up from the southwest. A dull and damp day for many. We cling on to the brightness in the far northeast until lunchtime. But it's going to be, well, cloudy with outbreaks of rain for many places once again. And then the wind picks up. Another blustery day to come on Friday, although plenty of sunshine around. Further unsettled weather this weekend.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually